As a director, I see my job as sort of being the audience on set.
Christopher Nolan spent years preparing to bring one of the oldest stories in Western literature to the biggest screen imaginable. But before audiences could even decide whether the Odyssey was a masterpiece, a disaster, or something completely different, a fierce cultural argument had already exploded. The film had the director of Oppenheimer, Inception, and The Dark Knight. It had Matt Damon as Odysseus, Tom Holland as Telemachus, Anne Hathaway as Penelope, Zendaya, Robert Pattinson, Lupita Nyong'o, Charlize Theron, and one of the most ambitious cinematic visions in modern Hollywood. And yet, instead of everyone celebrating, a major backlash began. Some Greeks asked a simple question: where are the Greek actors? Others criticized the casting of characters from Greek mythology. Some attacked the film's American accents. Others questioned the costumes, the dialogue, the armor, the ships, and the way Nolan had transformed Homer's ancient epic into something much more modern. Then, Christopher Nolan finally responded. And his answer was surprisingly direct, because according to Nolan, the conversations happening before people had even seen the movie were essentially irrelevant. But was that response enough to calm the backlash? Or did it make the debate even bigger? This is the full story of the controversy surrounding Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. Why this film was always going to be controversial. Few stories in human history carry the cultural weight of Homer's The Odyssey. The poem is not simply another old adventure story, it is one of the foundational works of Western literature. For thousands of years, people have read, translated, performed, studied, and reimagined the journey of Odysseus. A king leaves home to fight in the Trojan War. The war ends. But instead of returning home quickly, Odysseus begins a long and dangerous journey across the sea. He encounters monsters, gods, temptation, violence, betrayal, and loss. And after years away, he finally attempts to return to Ithaca, his wife Penelope, and his son Telemachus. That story has been interpreted in countless ways. But for many Greeks, the Odyssey is not simply a universal story. It is also deeply connected to their cultural heritage. So when Hollywood announced a gigantic new adaptation starring some of the biggest actors in the world, excitement quickly mixed with concern. Because the question was never only, will the movie be good? For some people, the question was, who has the right to represent this story? And that is where the controversy began. The casting became the first flashpoint. The film's casting immediately attracted attention. Matt Damon was chosen to play Odysseus. Tom Holland was cast as Telemachus. Anne Hathaway played Penelope. And the ensemble included major international stars such as Zendaya, Robert Pattinson, Charlize Theron, and Lupita Nyong'o. The casting was undeniably ambitious. But some viewers, particularly in Greece and among the Greek diaspora, were frustrated by the lack of Greek actors in major roles. The criticism became especially intense surrounding Lupita Nyong'o's casting as Helen of Troy. Helen is one of the most famous figures in Greek mythology. Her story is connected to the Trojan War, the conflict that begins the larger world of the Odyssey. Some critics argued that Hollywood had once again taken a foundational story connected to Greek culture and presented it without meaningfully including Greek performers. The criticism was not universal. Many people defended the casting and argued that mythology belongs to the world. After all, Homer's stories have been translated and adapted across centuries and cultures. But the backlash was real, and it quickly became part of a much larger debate about cultural representation. Some online reactions became highly political, while other criticism was more focused on cultural authenticity. The most reasonable version of the argument was simple. If Hollywood is spending hundreds of millions of dollars to make one of the greatest Greek stories ever told, why not include more Greek actors? That question continued to follow the film. Then came the accents. The next controversy arrived when audiences heard the characters speak. The film was in English. That was not unusual. Hollywood has made countless historical and mythological films in English. But some viewers were surprised that the characters did not use Greek accents. Instead, the actors spoke with their own modern English-speaking voices. For some people, this immediately destroyed the illusion of ancient Greece. They argued that the characters sounded too modern. Others pointed out that the entire situation was complicated. What would an authentic ancient Greek accent even sound like? Ancient Greek was not spoken with the accent of modern Athens. And if actors used a modern Greek accent while speaking English, that would also be historically inaccurate. The reality is that every historical film makes choices. Language must be translated. Costumes must be designed. Locations must be recreated. And ancient people must be represented by modern actors. The question is not whether a film can perfectly reproduce the past. It cannot. The question is what kind of interpretation the director is attempting. And Christopher Nolan had a very clear answer to that. Nolan's biggest defense: this is not a museum exhibit. Nolan argued that people often look at the ancient world in a strange way. They either treat it as something completely foreign and impossible to understand, or they place it on a pedestal and imagine it as a perfect marble-covered fantasy. But Nolan wanted something different. He wanted the world of the Odyssey to feel earthy, grounded, physical, and accessible. In his view, ancient people were still people. They experienced fear, desire, anger, grief, ambition, love, and guilt. They were not statues. They were not museum exhibits. They were human beings. That philosophy influenced the entire film. Nolan wanted to remove some of the assumptions modern audiences automatically bring to ancient stories. Instead of creating a perfectly polished fantasy version of Greece, he wanted the world to feel raw and lived in. That decision explains many of the choices that attracted criticism. The costumes are not always what audiences expect. The armor looks stylized. The ships do not necessarily resemble what viewers imagine when they think of ancient Greece. The dialogue can sound surprisingly modern, and the characters are played by a globally diverse cast. For Nolan, those choices were not mistakes. They were part of his interpretation. So what exactly did Nolan say? When asked about the online backlash, Nolan did not appear shocked. His response was essentially that controversy comes with the territory. He argued that conversations taking place before audiences have seen the finished film are limited because the people participating in those arguments do not yet know what the film actually is. That was his central point. People were debating the casting, the accents, the costumes, the dialogue, the interpretation. But many of them had not yet seen the full movie. Nolan also compared the situation to his experience with Batman. When he took over the character, Batman had already existed for decades. Millions of people had strong opinions about what Batman represented. But Nolan learned something important during that experience. You cannot make a film while worrying about every expectation surrounding the source material. At some point, the director has to make the movie. And Nolan clearly followed that philosophy with the Odyssey. He knew the story was beloved, he knew the mythology carried enormous cultural weight, he knew every decision would be analyzed. But he still chose to make his own version. The film's biggest creative change, perhaps the most controversial element of Nolan's version, is that it does not simply recreate Homer's poem scene by scene. The director reimagines the story psychologically. The gods are not necessarily presented as straightforward supernatural figures. Athena, for example, can be interpreted through memory, guilt, or psychological experience. The film also explores Odysseus as a deeply damaged man. His journey is not simply an adventure, it is a story about the consequences of war, the psychological scars of violence, the burden of leadership, and the moral choices that haunt a person long after the battle ends. Nolan also changes the ending. The film moves away from some of the traditional elements of Homer's conclusion and creates a more psychologically grounded interpretation of Odysseus's return. Christopher Nolan did not make the Odyssey to recreate the past exactly as everyone imagined it. He made his own version of one of the oldest stories ever told. But what do you think? Did Christopher Nolan go too far with his version of the Odyssey? Should Hollywood have included more Greek actors? Or does mythology belong to everyone, allowing filmmakers to reinterpret these stories however they want? Let us know your opinion in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into Hollywood controversies, cinematic history, and the stories behind the biggest movies in the world, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications.